You ready, man? Okay. The Kaisel the Kaisel HaMaravi is a very interesting place. It's Mitzad Echad, Chazal tell us Me'elam Leizaza Shechina from the Kaisel HaMaravis. The Shechina is always there. Mitzad Sheni, today in the modern form of Israel, it became like a national monument, and they do like army swearing-in ceremonies there. V'chulu v'chulu. There's separate areas that are clear, like makam tefillas for men and women, and then there's like a photo shoot area, which is for everybody. You have, people of all stripes and faiths coming. The Kaisel is like an interesting place. It's a very interesting place. Now, there's one of the most interesting groups that Dreizach by the Kaisel, and I don't know, I've seen them, you could see them, on Rosh Chodesh, Vasikin time-ish. Every Rosh Chodesh, a group comes to the Kaisel. It's called the Women of the Wall. It's a colorful group. They come with colorful talesim. Some of them are wearing tefillin. V'yamol, they try to sneak in a Sefer Torah to lane. You've never seen them? Yeah, fascinating group called the Women of the Wall. Now, not all of them are religious, b'chlal. A lot of them are not even religious at all. They're Reform, some conservative, some religious. I don't know if they're all Jewish. They come and they have a maracha that they would like the Kaisel to be more egalitarian, and they want, all kinds of Jews to have a yad at the Kaisel, shlita at the Kaisel, and they come. Now, their main vehicle of expressing their displeasure with the religious status quo of the Kaisel is that they come wearing talis and tefillin. Now, wearing talis and tefillin for a woman is very out of character, very odd. And that's how they show that the Orthodox are dominating this place, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be for everybody. And they come with their multicolored talesim and tefillin and etc. Now there's been several tshuvas from different people back and forth discussing the phenomenon of the Women of the Wall. Some of the Women of the Wall have written tshuvas in Hebrew and in English. Fascinating. I looked them up to validate and rationalize their whole halacha chayim, what they're doing over there. So we've been talking a lot about, women milumadas, Talmidei Chachamim, women who were learned throughout the Deiros. So I thought it would be interesting to discuss women wearing talis and tefillin throughout the Deiros. Now, I know that everybody has in the back of their mind somewhere that Rashi's daughters wore tefillin. I hate to ruin your childhood. They more than likely did not. I was not able to find, I really looked. If someone finds something, please send it to me. I looked. There are many people who are fakishivt with Rashi's daughters. There are many people who know about the mystique and the myth and the legend of Rashi's daughters, and we'll go into that a lot. Rashi's daughters. It's a fascinating story, but I was not able to find a single, even quasi-reliable source that, and certainly not something from a long time ago, that says that Rashi's daughters wore tefillin. So I think we're going to have to put that on ice and say Rashi's daughters did not wear tefillin. Now, we'll get back to Rashi's daughters, but I first wanted to discuss a little bit the sugya of wearing tefillin for women, and then we'll circle back to Rashi's daughters because I was thinking about it over the week. I don't think there's a single family, maybe I'm wrong, maybe someone will tell me something different. I don't think there's a single family that contributed to Limud HaTorah in such a breit oifen like Rashi and his family. Rashi and his children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and then when you layer in the Talmidim of all of these things, so much dominate limud, b'chlal, meaning the whole idea of gefes being like the building block for every type of limud is gefes, Gemara, Rashi, Taisvis. Like they dominate the space in a way that I think no other family could lay claim to. And because of that, there's like a certain sense of like a beis harav. A lot of times when you have a family that's multi-generational contributors, either to Torah or to Chassidus or to Yadus, whatever it is, they develop this like identity called the beis harav. In Volozhin, if you read any of the books that people wrote about Volozhin, a lot of the Gedolim who wrote even about the Tkufas in Volozhin, the Netziv, Lamashal, at least quoted by his nephew, writes about his terrible fear of the beis harav. When he married into the Ritzel of Volozhin's family, he was the younger son-in-law. It was a family of legends, of luminaries. The women were dominant, were like strong hashkafa people. They had a lot of, like a beis harav creates men and women in their own way, who are very, very strong, conveyors of the Messiah and the Torah. And the women in Rashi's family, and by Rashi's family I mean like the greater Rashi's family, extending down several deiros, were no different than this. And it was a true beis harav, meaning Rashi's Einiklich and whatever, but let's leave that, we'll get to that. I want to just discuss the sugi a little bit. So there's a famous Gemara in Eruvin, on the Tzadik Vav Menalef, that says as follows. The Gemara is talking about like this. The Gemara in Eruvin is trying to dan if tefillin is a mitzvah sensation as man gram or not. Are there times that tefillin is not supposed to be worn? The Gemara says as follows. It brings a Manda Amr that says like this. Elahai Tana the Tanya, Michal Bas Kushi, Menachas tefillin. Michal, the daughter of Shaul HaMelech, who was Kush, who was called Kush, would put on tefillin. V'lei Michu b'chacham, the chacham wore meicha. Ve'eshter shel Yaina, and the wife of Yaina Hanavi, she would do alila regel, and the chacham wore meicha. So the Gemara over here brings him on the Amar that Michal Bas Shaul used to put on tefillin, and Yoina, with Eishes Yoina, the wife of Yoina, whose name we don't know, L'chaira, used to be Eil Regav, Lemichal B'chacham. The Chacham didn't make Amacha. So the Gemara makes a dik, Mid Lemichal B'chacham, Alma Kasavi Mitzvah Sasei Shalei Man Gramahu. From the fact that the Chacham weren't Meicha and Michal putting on tefillin, you see that they must have held that tefillin is not a Mitzvah Sasei Man Grama. To which the Gemara retorts, the Gemara says, no, it's not a Raya. V'dilma Sfir Leik Reb Yosi, maybe they hold like Reb Yosi, Damanashim Seimchas Rishos. That says that even though something's a Mitzvah Sasei Man Grama, women are allowed to, in an involuntary and optional manner, they're allowed to participate in Mitzvah Sasei Man Gramas. This is the Gemara. Now, Taisvis, Rashi says that the reason why they wouldn't have been able to do it is because Mitzvah Sasei Man Grama, and there would have been Bal Taisif. Taisvis argues on this, and Taisvis says something different. Taisvis says the reason why women shouldn't be putting on tefillin is because tefillin needs guf naki, tzrichin guf naki. V'nashin ein zrizis lizar, nashim are not zaris to be zahir in guf naki. Now, in some other Rishonim, you see the reason is very, very practical. Women are busy raising children are dirty, and it's impossible for women to stay clean enough to wear tefillin. They were talking about the tkufa back in Yimei Chazal when they wore tefillin the whole day. And to wear tefillin the whole day when you're busy raising children who are spilling and using the bathroom and doing whatever they're doing, it's impossible to stay clean. Nashim ein zrizis lizar b'nekiyas. That's what the Taisus holds. Now Taisus over here brings something interesting also. Taisus in the Maskal Michal Baskushi, Taisus says b'psikta, the Psikta Rabasi says as follows: the Rav Chizki b'shem Rav Avo Amru, Ishtel shal Yoina Hushva, Michal Baskushi Michal b'chachamim. The Psikta brings a different man to Amar, a chaylik on this Gemara, that says that no, not true. They turned Eishes Yoin around. They said, go back home, don't be a l'regel. And Michal Bas Kushi, they were Meichaba. They told her not to put on tefillin. So Taisvis already opens up the idea. Incidentally, just some the irony. Taisvis is the mandamar who introduces the psikta that says that even though the Gemara over here is mashma that women are allowed to put on tefillin, like certain women put on tefillin, Taisvis introduces a psikta that says even that one famous legend, famous story of Michal Bas Shaul putting on tefillin is not true. They were Meichaba. It's not allowed. Meaning maybe she did it, but Chazal were not pro. Chazal were against it. So this is the Iker Gemara. Now, if you looked at just this Gemara itself, you would take away l'chaira, putting Taisus aside, you would take away that yes, women are not mechuyev in putting on tefillin, but if they want to put on tefillin, l'chaira, it's not that much different than any other mitzvah saseh as man grama. And just like our women listen to shofar and they shake lulav, and Ashkenazi women even make brachas on these mitzvahs, so you would come away with the same conclusion that l'chaira women could do the same thing. Now, I don't think so. No. I'm saying we pass like we see that women are allowed to do mitzvah sashes man grama, but no, this is not. No, we don't take anything from that. Now, and taka, based if you came to that conclusion, you wouldn't be crazy. There are a smattering of different things that are brought down. The Maril Lamashal in the Minhagim Maril, he brings down about two famous Rebbitzins, the Rebbitzin Bruna from Magenza and a different one whose name I'm not even going to bother trying to pronounce, a German name, who both wore tefillin. It's brought down in certain svarim that the Archaim HaKadish's wife wore tefillin. One of his wives, the Archaim HaKadosh was married a bunch of times, but one of his wives wore tefillin. The maiden of Ludmir, whatever, Chana Rachel Webermacher, right? It was the maiden of Ludmir, a famous woman. She wore tefillin. There was a smattering of cases throughout the Darius of women who wore tefillin. But again, all these people are quoting it, and the Maril was much closer to Rashi's time than we are, and very much lived in the shadow of Rashi or Mishpachtei. Makes zero reference to the fact that Rashi's daughters did. He knows of no such occurrence that Rashi's daughters were wearing tefillin. Now, that's the conclusion that you would come to. Now, the Ma'aseh, if you look in a Shulchan Aruch, it seems to change a little bit from the other. Shulchan Aruch in Archaim and Siman Yud Zayin, Shulchan Aruch brings as follows. In Siman Yud Zayin, which is Hilchos Tzitzis, the Mechaber in Siman Beis, in Sif Beis, says as follows. It says, Nashim v'avadim p'turim p'nei shemitzvah seishes man grama. Haggah says the Ramah, Mikol makam im roitzim la'atvu, if they want to put on talis, u'levarach alav, her shus b'yadim, it's a reshus. Just like any other mitzvah seishes man grama, which is how you would take away from this Gemara kipshute. Says the Rama, ach mechsi ki yuara, it looks haughty. Ulachein ein lahem luvish tzitzis. Oh, ve'ein a chayves gavra. Tzitzis is not a chayves gavra. You're not mechuyev to do it. It's extra even for men on some level. So women, zecher looks haughty, they shouldn't do it. This is what the Rama ends off. Now they're okay. That's like heading in the direction of not allowing it, but not as a shtark. Now in Siman Lamed Ches, when the Mechaber talks about tefillin. Over there, they clamp down a little bit more. In Hilchos Tefillin, in Siman Lamed Ches and Sif Gimel, it says as follows: Nashim v'avadim p'turim mitefillin, b'nei shu mitzvah seishes man grama. They're part of tefillin. This is the Mechaber because it's mitzvah seishes man grama. Says the Ramah, Haggah, v'manashim roitzim lahachmer al atzman. If the nashim want to be machmer themselves to wear tefillin, moichin biyadam. The Ramah brings a kolbai, who says that by tefillin it's different. By tefillin moichin biyadam. We don't allow nashim to put on tefillin even if they want to. Now the Achronim ask, what happened to the Gemara? The kolbai is arguing the Gemara. So to which most Achronim say the Kalvei obviously held like that Taisus bringing the Psikta meant that Taisus paskin like the Psikta, that we go with the version of Rav Chia that Machu Bechacham, the Cham war Moich and Michal, and therefore there is no Meiser Rav in this Gemara in Erevin, and we go like Taisus says from the Psikta that we don't paskin like this, and you have to be Moich with them. Now what's interesting is that in the Paiskim there's so many different like Nekudis to why Tefillin is so much worse. There's a Targum Yenis Ben Uziel that interestingly teaches the pasuk of Le'yeh Gever Simlas. What do you say? Le'silvas Gever Simlash Isha. But the other one, we want the other one. We want Le'yeh Kli Gever. We want the other one. We want the women one. That's what I'm saying. Le'silvas is the one that's the autopilot one. We want the one from Nashim. The Targum Yenis Ben Uziel teaches Le'yeh Gulurin the Tzitzis Tefillin Dehinan Takina Gavra Alitza. They shouldn't be the takine gavra, like the man's clothing of tzitzis and tefillin on a woman. This is how Targum Yenis Ben Uziel teaches. So again, Targum Yenis Ben Uziel seems to be learning, like the day Achilekas on our Gemara, like the day that Taisus is bringing down from the Psikta, that at all costs we're makbid. It's leisilbash. It's sinisha deiraisa. We don't want women wearing talis and tefillin. And Michal, even if she did it, it was Michal b'chacham, and it was some sort of exception. Now, what's interesting is that there are others who say the Shilta Gibarim Mashal and others that say Michal was an exception. Why? Because Michal, the pasuk really tells us, but Chazal, it's a clear in Chazal if she never had children or she didn't have children at a certain point. But one way or the other, Michal at a certain point in her life, for episode Tkufa, was out of the parsha of childbirth. She was not having children anymore, and she lived in a palace. She was the king's daughter. As we know, if you learn Navi, she didn't go with David HaMelech. She stayed, in the Chatzar of Shaul. So the Shilta Gibarim says Michal was a pampered woman who had no children to get her dirty. She had servants to take care of her every whim, of her every need. She was an Isha Tzadekis on a very high level. So he says if you have an Isha Tzadekis for Chachama, a high level woman who also has a full retinue of servants who can take care of everything, and also is not having children, so then maybe she's zar to be Nizar and Shmiras HaGuf, and she could be Gufnaki, and she's allowed to wear tefillin. So Michal is like the quintessential exception, but nothing to learn from. That's how the Shilta Gibarim is Miyashiv. He'll these two sources, like the Targum Yenis Ben Uziel and the Psikta, how it stems with our Gemara. Now, there's something even more interesting. In the Sefer Yafa Lalev, he brings some Shemer Emunim Kadman, I believe, who says as follows. He says, Kli Gever ba'atbash is gematria zu tefillin. The atbash of Kli Gever is tefillin. Shem Soid Alma de Duchra. Tefillin are, Kabbalistically speaking, mi Alma de Duchra. Ve'ein raya mi Michal Bashol shoyse menachas tefillin. Ki Michal hoyse isha chachama. Ve'yada ba'atzma shoyse lo neshama me'olim de Duchra. Michal knew that she had a neshama of a man. Whatever that means. Michal knew. Now this is a big shmooze in the Kabbalah. If you could have Gilgul from man to women, do women even come back as Gilgul? And Ramami Fanu. It's rather a topic we should talk about one day. Hilchas Gilgul, and if it applies to women in what context. But Akaban the Shemer Munim is saying that women are mufka from the mitzvah of tefillin because they don't have the mitzvah of tefillin is me'alma de duchra. Women are not me'alma de duchra. But Micha Bashal, who was Isha Chachama, she knew something, that no one else was able to know. And Mela, she was like taka. Not some an exception to the halacha, she was different, meaning she was different. There was something different about her that allowed her to put on tefillin, and there's nothing to learn from there. Now, it's an interesting tshuva from Rav Moshe to wrap this up. Rav Moshe has a beautiful tshuva. It's a tshuva written in 1966, like at the beginning of like the militant feminist movement. It's written to a Rav, Rabbi Kelmer, who was a Rav in Boston, who had in his kehila highly educated women, let's assume doctors and lawyers or whatever, who were also from, and they were feminists, meaning they were big feminists. They were active in feminist politics in the United States, and they were also taking it home to the shul. And Rabbi Kalmer wrote to Rav Moshe, how does he, where do you bend, where do you give, where do you not give? And Rav Moshe has a beautiful tshuva. It's almost like a hashkafa piece. It's not so much halacha. I want to read from the tshuva a little bit. Rav Moshe writes as follows. He's saying, "B'dvar hanashim hashananis v'achshuvis, asher b'inyanei hanhagas hamedina ba'olam hem gam keim ha'alochmas yachadem tunu k'zu hanashim ha'alochmas." You have these women that are like educated women. They're involved in feminist politics in the United States. He says, and they stand shoulder to shoulder with women of the world, and they're very active. He says, "Avnashim elu shein shomer Torah." They're also from. They would like to enlarge and expand their battle to the din of the negei and the Torah. There are some of them who come to shul with a talis and stuff like this. And you asked me to express my point of view on this and tell you what to do about this. So he writes to Moshe as follows. He's in the first thing they have to know, he says, is one of the main yesodis of our emunah is Shalanu, Shekala Torah ben Shebachsav ben Shebal Peh Nitnei Hakadosh Baruch Hu B'atzim Bar Sinai Yedei Moshe. The whole Torah Shebal Peh, Torah Shebachsav was given by Moshe ben Bar Sinai. V'yafshel Lashanas Avilu Kutz Echad LeLahakav LeLahachmer. You're not allowed to change even one tiny detail, not Lahakal, not Lahachmer. Ach Nitztavinu that during certain dairis tzarich l'sayig u'legader hayachivas lan hedjin v'chachmei atayr l'sakin. He says Chazal had a job to misakin to add layers to the Torah to make tikkunim. He says now b'zman hazeh when we went to Galus, we don't have a bezdin, we don't have anybody who has the shlita to make takanas on everybody. So it's every localized paisik and Rav's job to make small takanas for short term. That's what he says, to make small takanas for short term periods to be able to guide his people to keep Yiddishkeit how it has to be. He says. Then he continues. He says, even if the whole world changes around us, even rich women who have a different circumstance, this is in direct conflict with the Shilti Gibarim and the Yifei Lev and these things that are saying that circumstances matter. He says, even if women have a whole different circumstance, you could have a whole staff of nannies and servants to raise the children. He says the din Torah doesn't change, and therefore a woman's role as designed by the Torah is what a woman's role as designed by the Torah is, and it doesn't change if your circumstance changes. So therefore he says, he continues, Ivra de'ikar rishus l'chol isha l'kayim af mitzvah shleichivas and atayr. He says, avada, it's true that women are allowed to opt in and be mekayim even mitzvahs that they're not mechuyivin. He says, so therefore it comes down, it just depends what their intentions are, he says. If the intention is to be an attack on the Torah and to say, the Torah is limited, it's missing, it's not responsive to the modern world, and therefore we're going to fix it and we're going to show, we're going to come and tell us in tefillin, that's totally unacceptable. But if it's just because a woman, wants to do a mitzvah like shayfer, like lulav, so put on a talis, knock yourself out, go put on a talis. Now he's not talking about tefillin. Tefillin is much more chamer, as we saw even in the Shulchan Aruch. Tefillin is more chamer. The Ramah brings the kolbay, it seems like we paskin moichin bay. But by talis, says Ramosha, if they want, and it's not with bad intentions, and he leaves that up to Rabbi Kelmer's discretion, what bad intentions and what's not bad intentions are, then she could do the mitzvah, although provided she understands that the Torah is nothing changes and it is what it is. And then he throws in a nice little thing at the end. He says, it's not because women are less halig than men. It's just that Hashem patted them from certain mitzvahs because their role is different. So it's like a very nice tshuva. He's addressing the early religious feminists, and this is how Moshe wraps up the sugya of talis and tefillin for women. Now, that's the sugya part. Now let's circle back to Rashi and Mishpachtei. So now, I just want to open with this. There's a famous Marshal, the Marshal in the Hakdamat Yam Shlema. The Marshal liked this shtickle so much that he put it in the beginning of 2 of the volumes. They weren't published all as a set. The Marshal published them over time. And the Hakdamat to the volume on Baba Kama and the Hakdamat to the volume of Chulin, he basically puts the same shtickle in with minor shinuyim. So he held this was like Mamash, you say this like a piece. And in it he's writing about how the Torah is complex and confusing. And if you learn Gemara, it's very hard to get a grip of, exactly everything. He says, and there's a lot of balkanization. He writes, there's a lot of balkanization. The Sfardim, the Ashkenazim, each one thinks that they know better and that their Rishonim are the way to go and they're the only ones who get the outcome. And he writes some pretty harsh words about the Rambam here, which we won't read now. It's not relevant to us now. But he writes how the Rambam thought, he says the Rambam, we will go into it a little bit because I can't help myself. The Rambam writes that he wrote the perfect sefer that was Mesakim Kol Terakula, and he named it Mishnah Torah, meaning you don't need anything else, in place of this. This is the sefer that you learn. And of course, it's lacking, and it's Chalaim B'lei Pisrain, and there's so many places where you don't even know what the Rambam means. Maybe it's a Girsa mistake, and the Ravid already questions him in the places and whatever. I rather once heard, this is like a digression on a digression, that there's a few svarim that the names are like these mamish monumental names, that imply that they're the be-all and end-all of svarim, and nobody calls them by that name. The Rambam is called Mishnah Torah, the name of the sefer. Almost nobody calls the Rambam Mishnah Torah. You call the Rambam. If you're trying to say something that the Rambam wrote about in a few places, then you'll say the Rambam in Mishnah Torah writes in Yad. You don't even search there. That's one. The Shlah Kaddish called his sefer Shnei Luchas Abris, which you can't get better than that. Nobody calls it Shnei Luchas Abris. You call it the Shlah Kaddish. There's more. What do you say? Teres Moshe. Okay, yeah, maybe Teres Moshe. But there's more. The Mabit. What's the Mabit sefer on Chumash? What? No, on Chumash. There's more. There's a few examples of this. These are the ones that pop out. There's a few examples of this. If you overshoot on the name, the Velt doesn't accept it for some reason. It's like an interesting thing. If you overshoot on the name, so the Yam Shlomo is busy with the same critique that it's an overshoot. Then he continues on. He gets to the Ashkenaz and the Balei Tosfos, and he says as follows. He says, "Nachzil Rishonim la Talmud asher anu oiskim by v'mimenu anu sheisim." The Talmud that we learn from it and we drink its waters. Lulei chachmei atzerfatim. He says, I'm sorry. Lulei chachmei atzerfatim. If not for the Ashkenazi Rishonim, Balei Tosfos, she'asu oisik kekader echad, who made it like one globe, one ball, one interconnected thing. V'aleim nemar divrei chachamim kedarbanos, vavchu v'dilgalu mimakom l'makom. They turned it over and they rounded it out. Here they sanded off the rough edges. Ad shenira lanu ka'achas mibli soiser and bli oiker. Until you're able to perceive the shas as one thing, without a soiser, without oiker. There's no machliksim. There's no, everything is alone. It's one flow. Everything kind of makes sense. El sugizu emeres b'koy v'sugizu emeres b'koy v'lekarv zelzeh. You don't think that anymore. V'nimtzim yosher at Talmud u'makosher v'chol hastimus yifashru v'teichen psakav ya'ishru. He says they were able to make the Talmud into one, contiguous, flowing sugya, one flowing thing, and therefore all the psakim and everything makes sense. And then he continues on, he brings examples. He says Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam and the other Rishonim who followed him and etc. And they turned it. And then he says, and of course, not everyone agrees with this. And you have some people who say, no, our Svarim are better, our Mahalach Halimut is better. He says, but the Ramban was Maidal Emes, and the Ramban wrote about the Chachmei Tzefatim. He says, Heim HaMoirim, Heim HaHoirim. They're the ones that you have to listen to, and they made the Talmud, and without them, Menelei Yazuz. And he quotes like the different Svardi Rishonim that say that the Ashkenazi, Laimdim were the ones who gave the Talmud it's shleimus. Now, putting aside the racial stuff that's triggering, that makes it interesting, that makes it exciting, what he's saying is obviously is a very, very true emistic point. That before Rashi and Tosfos came to the Gemara was a Sefer Chasam. If you look at the Gaonim's Chuvas, primarily a lot of the Chuvas are, what does the Taich in this? What does this din mean? What's the Makar for this? Your average person did not have the ability to learn the Shas, Bishlemus, which is why the Rambam and the Rif and others wrote Kitzur Svarim, so to speak, to make Limud HaTalmud easier, meaning we'll extract for you just the basic halachas, what you need to walk away with, and you'll be able to learn it, because the Shas itself, with all its hard words and all its hard concepts, and every logical supposition, and the way the Gemara asks the kasha, and what words the Gemara chooses to mean, and we take for granted how Rashi always tells us when a bitmiya is, when a benichusa is, what type of kasha it is, when it's a psak, when it's a resolution, when it's a machlekes. Right? Rashi comes along and Rashi smooths out the Talmud in a way that makes it accessible for everybody that never existed before. And then the Balei Tosfos come and they complicate it. They take what Rashi opened up, the shleimus ha'inyan and the easiness of it, and they start being makhesh, mefarik, sugya to sugya, kasha hazoi, this mandamar, that mandamar. But by the time they're done, 180 years later, by the time the Balei Tosfos are done, they again added on a layer of shleimus and completion and accessibility that was never there before. And so by the time this family and its Talmidim, Rashi from 1040 until the mid 1200s, the early 1200s, Rashi, his grandchildren, his great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren, and their Talmidim are done with the Shas, it's changed forever to the way where there is no Jew in Klal Yisrael who learns Gemara without gefes. Meaning, even if you're learning it from art school, however you're learning it, whatever share you're going to, it's all gefes, right? It's all Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos. They changed the Shas forever in a way that we can't really imagine, because we cannot imagine it without it. Now, Rashi and his family is, and when I say the most Rebbeisha family that ever lived, l'chaira, is because Rashi has Rashi, right? Rashi comes and Rashi's a one-man revolution, right? Rashi writes Kimaran Kol HaShas, except for the few exceptions where it's filled in by his son-in-law, one by his grandson, right? There's Rambam Babasra, the Rivan and Makis, etc. Right? Rashi writes Kimaran Kol HaShas, maybe not on Nazir, maybe there's a few Masechtas that we don't have. We only have Madura Kama. It's fine. I'm not going to the academic part of this. Rashi writes in Kimaran Kol HaShas. Rashi writes on Chumash, which is legendary. Rashi writes on Navi, which is a little less conclusive and safe davar than on Chumash, but still Rashi writes on most of Navi. So Rashi's a one-man revolution. Then Rashi has only daughters. Rashi has no sons. Rashi has 3 daughters, Miriam, Rachel, and Yecheved, 3 daughters that Rashi has. And from those daughters grows the Balei Tosfos, the famous Balei Tosfos, Rabbeinu Tam, who's Rashi's grandson, who's quoted over 2,000 times in Shas. The Ri of Dan Pierre, the Ri Azakin, is Rashi's great-grandson, is quoted over 3,000 times in Shas. The Rashbam, who writes a Pirush in Kol Terakula, and is also quoted throughout Shas. The Rivan, the Ravan, Rav Yehuda Sir Leon, Rav Yom Tov Tov Elam. There's so many, like a dozen named Balei Tosfos, and Rabbeinu Tam, according to the Marshal in this Hakdama, had a yeshiva that had 80 Talmidim at the same time. And keep in mind, the yeshiva in those days had people who were going to become, Laimdim, Talmidei Chacham. It wasn't just the yeshiva. Not everyone went to yeshiva. It meant you were going to become somebody. Rashi had 80, Rabbeinu Tam had 80 Talmidim. The Ri of Dampierre had 60 Talmidim. The German Balei Tosfos, the Ashkenazi, the French Balei Tosfos, and it becomes a world of its own. Now, in this family is an interesting feature. Because Rashi only had daughters, so there's a lot of women's involvement in the Messiah of this family, more so than you would find in other families. Rashi only had daughters, his Miriam, Rachel, and Yecheved, and not every single one of them, but Miriam and Rachel in particular, there are psakim that are quoted by different Balei Tosfos. Rabbeinu Tam, Lamashal, married a Miriam also, who was not related to him, I think, but he was also from a Chasheva family, an anical of like Rav Shamshin or whatever, like another famous German family. The Ri, who was Rabbeinu Tam's nephew and Rashi's great-grandson, married like into the family Rebbish. He married an anical of Rashi also. He married someone who quoted Psakim. Now, I don't know how much time we have. We'll do a little bit. I just want to share like a few of the various Psakim that are brought down in their names. It's an interesting phenomenon to find so many of Rashi's mishpacha, the women in the family, Psakim were quoted. Now, for example, there's one tshuva from the Tshuvas Maimoni that I want to just get to in a second. That's a very wichtig one. The Tshuvas Maimoni has a whole shaila. Granted, it's a kitchen question, but it's a whole shaila as follows. Nishala shaila me'echem b'balei HaTosfos. There was a shaila in the Beis Medrash of the Balei HaTosfos as follows. Im mutar lahaniach machvas al pashtida, v'achikach lafais tachtea fluden hepach b'li liba. Now these are common fleshig and milchig foods in those days. And the shaila is about using the same oven surface, the same hot oven surface, one after the other for these two foods. Could you cook one after the other? At the end of the tshuva, he says as follows: V'sha'alti la'almanas doidi. I asked the almana of my uncle, that's the Rimi Dampierre, Yitzchak of Dampierre, that's Rashi's great-grandson. He says, I asked my aunt, right? Yeah, right, my aunt. He asked my aunt, v'amra, shebayla lo hayamoicha biyadam, v'hayoifen tachas machvas achas pashtida achar fluden, v'chein noigim bebeis Rabbeinu Meir Zikni, ubebeis Maras Miriam bas Pitish Rabbeinu Shlema. Aval Maras Miriam eishes doidi Rabbeinu Tam, he machmir l'labna. Now, I'll excuse you if that was a little convoluted, but the point is, he just quoted in one psak 3 or 4 of the women in Rashi's household, he spanned generations, from Rashi's daughters to granddaughter to great-granddaughter, what exactly their minig was. And this is a tshuva in the Tshuvas Maimoni that explaining this halacha. V'leinoideli im al pi doidi asa, al pi baila rishon of Avram shais regila b'chumris, regilas b'chal makim. Says my aunt had a minig over here, and I don't know if it was because the Ri told her to, or she was fifing the Ri and doing her old minig from her first husband, who was a bigger machmer than the Ri. So it's like these women had a mind of their own. These are not women that are. He's quoting the psak of these various women in Rashi's Mishracha. And if I knew a psak from Rabbeinu Tam, he says, if I knew what Rabbeinu Tam held, Rabbeinu Tam was the Paisik Hadar, I would hold like him. But so b'lav hachi, I'll be seimach on the edus of the B'nai Kedei Hadar. Let me be seimach on the daughters of the B'nai Kedei Hadar. Now this is just one that's like very extensive. It's 3 or 4 of them quoted in one discussion. But there's about, I don't know, I'm not going to exaggerate, let's say 7 of these throughout different Rishonishe Asfarim that quote psakim from some member of the family, Rashi's daughters, granddaughters, great-granddaughters, what their minig was in regards to specific dinim. Now, which is a fascinating phenomenon that I don't think exists in too many other families. Meaning, granted, a lot of them are kitchen shilas, and a lot of them are what their husbands might have held, or their fathers might have held, or whatever. But Afal Pikin, they're trusting these women to establish psak in certain shilas chamuris. Now, I'll just end with this, mamash, one little detail, because we can't talk about women chachamis without ending up with this, just discussing this. What about taka women paskening? Let's say you want to go ask, a Rebbitzin of Chashav Rebbitzin halacha shayla. You want to ask her, what's the halacha? I rather once, I heard a story. Reb Moshe was once, someone was in Reb Moshe's house, he got a phone call, and they asked him, what bracha do you make on pretzels? So Reb Moshe put the phone down, and he said, Simma, what bracha do you make on pretzels? And she says, Mezainis. Not because he was asking her psak, because he didn't know what pretzels were. So, what type of food is pretzels? It's mezainis. I'm mezainis. He told us. So let's say you want to go ask, a Rebbitzin, a psak, a shayla. Could women pass in this shayla? And there's one very sadistic Gemara Makom that we have to just share before we leave the sugya. There's a Tosfos in Nida and Dafnun. Tosfos over there is going in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, "Kala kasher ladun kasher lahayid," and women are pasal ladun and therefore pasal lahayid. Women are not kosher for edus, like we mentioned in the past, and women are not kosher to be dayanim. Now, Tosfos asks a kasha, famous kasha. Tosfos says, "V'im taimar, very isha diksheir ladun kedachsib b'dvayra v'hi shefetes es Yisrael be'esahi." It's before a pasuk. It says Dvayra was the shefetes for Klal Yisrael. So how can you tell me women are not kosher ladun? Women can't paskin. It's a meforshah din. Women can be shefetes. So Tosfos brings a few terutzim, and Tosfos in one of his terutzim over here, Tosfos says, one second, only men. Taka women, there's exceptions. Inami, nehida benidunin have isha b'chlal, nekalmakim b'dayanim ein isha b'chlal. V'dvayra ha'isadana al pi adibur. Dvayra was dan al pi adibur. It was like she was a neviah. It wasn't something she was daning from chachmas atayra. It was a nevuah al pi adibur. Inami lo ha'isadana elam melamedes lehem adinim. She wasn't a dayan. She would teach the dayanim the halacha.
she would say shir for the dayanim, and the dayanim would go with the various psakim, and then be mafetzim in Klal Yisrael. So that mahalach in Taisa, that Taisa says that the Varya was like the Maggid Shir. She would teach them the dinim, and then they would go and paskin it. Seems like a woman who knows the psak could be relied on to teach the psak to men. And Taka, the Birkei Yosef in Chayshim Mishpat and Simon Ches writes that a Isha Chacham who is a Talmud Chacham, and you have a Shaila, you could ask her and she could tell you. And of course, it wouldn't surprise you to know that Rashi had a great granddaughter, Miriam Shapira, I think was her name was, or Travis. I forgot. There's a few different families. The Luria, Travis, and Shapira family, all direct Enikal Rashi. He had a granddaughter who the Maril, the Marshal, in one of the Tfusim, Tashut Marshal in the Hakdama, on the back over there, when he's talking about his own family legacy, where he comes from, he quotes that I had this great grandmother who used to say shir for the men, and she would sit, Miriam, I forgot her last name, she would sit behind the mechitza, and she would say shir for the men, Mishum Tznius, she would sit behind the mechitza. So the legend of Rashi's mishpacha, of the daughters in Rashi's family, being Talmidei Chachamim, being Oisei Gevenlich, and being different than other women of their era, is certainly true. But unfortunately, the legend of them putting on tefillin is more than likely not true. I guess it's a challenge. Find me the makar, and we'll do next week.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.